is missing, y'all. So I've been on TikTok scrolling videos, watching some other of my favorite creators, and I've seen a few that are asking, where is Ken Arker? Since that last live where he was obviously blowing snow and he was just going hard at people and, acting like he was trying to be a tough guy and defending Gypsy's honor, more like his own. We haven't seen him. I haven't heard from him. Where's Ken? A lot of people are speculating that he's in rehab. Some people are worried for his life because, he sleeps not in the same room, but under the same roof as the Gypinator.
Okay, I know everybody has been super excited at the thought that Ken is in rehab. And let me tell you, as of 3 days ago, he was not in rehab because he was seen in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Don't know if I said that right. Just a wild guess. But yes, him and Gypsy Rose were seen at Big Mike's. So if he was in rehab, he was out as of 3 days ago. I know everybody is saying that his sister had made a comment that he is in rehab. I have not personally seen that comment, but here is proof that he, again, was at Big Mike's in Thibodaux.
The most shocking and disgraceful moment in this ongoing Gypsy Rose Blanchard saga is not the original crime that captured the world's attention, not even the prison sentence that defined her 20s, and not the Netflix and Hulu documentaries that tried to package her trauma as entertainment, but rather the deeply unsettling spectacle of her father, Rod Blanchard, resurfacing decades too late, attempting to cleanse himself of responsibility by casting every stone he can at Didi, who, being dead, cannot speak in her defense, while ignoring his long absence, his years of neglect, and his selective memory. It is shocking because it reveals the desperate hunger for relevance that still drives this family. It is disgraceful because it shows how trauma, death, and dysfunction are endlessly recycled into TikTok theatrics, where Gypsy's faltering attempts at influencer lives spill out like an unending courtroom drama, messy, chaotic, and deeply revealing of how far people will go to avoid irrelevance. This case before us today is formally titled The Blanchard versus the Public Memory, a case where the defendants are not just one person, but a family, and the charges are not of murder or fraud, but of something far more corrosive: manipulation of narratives, exploitation of trauma, exposure of innocent children, deflection of blame, and monetization of dysfunction for online clout. This is not a courtroom with lawyers and gravels. It is the court of TikTok, where millions sit as judge and jury, dissecting every live stream, every rumor, every statement, and every shaky Instagram photo. The Blanchards, who once held the world's dark fascination with the horrifying tale of Munchausen by proxy, now refuse to let go of the spotlight. Instead, they claw their way back into relevance through interviews, Q&A sessions, staged lives, and opportunistic statements that reopen old wounds and expose deep contradictions. At the center is Gypsy Rose herself, once heralded as a tragic victim trapped under the control of her mother, later branded as a manipulator and criminal who plotted murder, and now as an unstable TikTok figure whose every move is dissected in comment sections with brutal honesty. Rod Blanchard, her absentee father who vanished into obscurity only to return whenever a camera or microphone is present, is accused of weaponizing ignorance and outrage to protect his image. He frames Didi as the eternal villain, ignoring the complex reality of his own decades of absence. And standing nearby is Ken Yuka, Gypsy's one-time fiancé and constant enabler, rumored to be battling substance problems, possibly even sent to rehab, yet still lingering in her orbit and therefore in Aurora's, perpetuating cycles of instability. Together, they represent a family whose common crime is the refusal to accept irrelevance, a dangerous insistence on keeping the Blanchard name in circulation at any cost.
Good God, what did I miss with Gypsy Rose? The haircut kind of shocked me a little bit, but supposedly Ken's sister said he's in rehab because he failed a drug test for CPS. What? You could tell, though, he looked a little under the influence on a couple of their lives. That was horrible, absolutely horrible. But I wonder what Gypsy's doing.
Exhibit A. Rod re-emerged with a statement that stunned the public, not because it demonstrated any brilliance, depth, or fatherly wisdom, but because of its sheer audacity and tone-deaf delivery. He parroted Gypsy's own words from years ago, recycling the same defense script she had once used behind prison walls, targeting haters and asking loaded questions like, if Didi was such a good mother, then why was Gypsy in a wheelchair? Why did they take a biopsy from her legs? These were not fresh insights, but shallow imitations of arguments already discredited, clumsily deployed by a father whose sudden presence felt more like a bid for personal attention and borrowed spotlight than a genuine act of parental protection. The public quickly recognized that his performance was not a revelation, but a rerun, a late arrival to a conversation that had long passed him by. The critical point here is not what Rod chose to say, but what he glaringly ignored. Medical documents and Freedom of Information Act records established beyond doubt that Gypsy's wheelchair use was not solely a fabrication imposed by Didi, but a condition prolonged by herself, who secretly realized she could walk, yet chose to keep that discovery hidden until 2011. This decision was complex, tied to fear, manipulation, and the desire to maintain consistency in her story.
Gypsy's daddy, Pimp Juice, Rod, has made a statement, and there are several interesting parts. So let's go through it.
Okay, so just some questions I had for all the haters. If their story is that everything can be explained from the microdeletion and Dee Dee was actually a good mother, some simple questions like, why was she in a wheelchair?
It was not the unilateral cruelty Rod implies. The biopsy he referenced, far from being proof of Didi's malice, was ordered because of Gypsy's persistent claims of immobility and the medical community's obligation to investigate the root cause. By failing to show up to appointments, by never familiarizing himself with the evidence, and by disappearing for years, Rod stripped himself of the authority to speak credibly on these issues. Yet here he was, positioning himself as the sudden arbiter of truth, wielding half-remembered fragments of the story he was barely present for.
Well, sir, Gypsy was in a wheelchair because she was young and kept it to herself. That she had feeling and tingling in her leg, she kept it to herself until 2011. Let's go on.
Why take biopsies on her legs?
Well, Rod, I'm going to go right back to this piece of evidence. The doctors took a biopsy from her legs because there was no reason why she shouldn't be walking, because she could walk. She just was lying to Dee Dee. And Dee Dee didn't know she was lying. So Dee Dee and the doctors were trying to find out, why can't Gypsy walk? Let's continue.
This selective outrage reveals his intent not to defend his daughter with facts, but to cleanse his own public image by defaming the dead, an act that is both cowardly and cruel. What this exhibit ultimately proves is Rod's desperation to rewrite history in a way that benefits him, his willingness to weaponize ignorance for clout, and his calculated attempt to step into the limelight decades late, even if doing so requires distortion of established facts. His saddened voice feels less like fatherly love or long-suppressed grief and more like a performance of borrowed relevance taken from a narrative that has already consumed his family and continues to unravel in the public square. Exhibit B. Rod continued his misguided crusade with another inflammatory statement. Why did they have to remove the salivary glands if Dee Dee was such a good mother? At first listen, it sounded like a damning question, sharp enough to cut through any defense. But in truth, it only revealed his dangerous ignorance and his lack of proximity to the facts. The hospital medical records, easily available to anyone willing to dig into the documentation, show that Gypsy underwent an extensive sleep study in which doctors observed her choking on saliva multiple times during the night, a life-threatening condition if left. The removal of the glands was recommended by trained specialists as the best medical solution, not an arbitrary mutilation ordered by Dee Dee for attention. Yet Rod, absent from the hospital room and completely ignorant of the studies, now frames the procedure as if it were a weapon of abuse.
Remove her salivary glands.
Removing Gypsy's salivary glands was not a quick, rash decision by these doctors. It took them 3 years of trying different options to decide that was the most valid solution. And it was done because a sleep study showed that Gypsy was choking on her spit. This is a game that is way too easy, but let's continue, Rod.
Why forge her birth certificate? If she was such a good mother, why would you do that?
Okay, Rod, let me explain something to you about parenting that you might not know because you have abandoned every single one of your kids, including the children you had with Christy, because you were always gone on the boat. Dee Dee likely forged the birth certificate to ensure that Gypsy could get the medical care that she needed. But also, let's not forget that it was you, sir, that said how Dee Dee was such a great mother in the prison emails. Now we're going to touch on one thing you said that I do agree with.
Makes his present outrage hollow, and his words betray the lack of understanding. This rhetorical question does far more harm than Rod seems to realize. By repeatedly insisting on this falsehood in public settings, he not only tarnishes Dee Dee's memory further, but also chips away at Gypsy's already fragile credibility. Many in the public have long questioned Gypsy's shifting narrative, pointing out the inconsistencies in her accounts and the contradictions between her interviews and court records. Rod's clumsy and uninformed statements pour gasoline on these doubts, handing skeptics new ammunition to argue that Gypsy was never simply a victim, but an active participant in deception and exaggeration. In the digital sphere, where perception often outweighs fact, Rod's ignorance becomes a weapon turned against his own, undermining her attempts to maintain her narrative of survival and abuse. This exhibit demonstrates how quickly misinformation mutates into accepted narrative in the public imagination, how the loud voice of an absent father can overshadow documented medical truth, and how half-truths shouted repeatedly on TikTok reverberate louder and longer than carefully archived hospital. Each misinformed question he poses is not just a slip of the tongue. It is a ripple that spreads across comment sections, live stream debates, and reaction videos, becoming a permanent part of the discourse, whether factual or not. In this way, Rod's ignorance does not remain personal. It contaminates the broader conversation, further enriching misinformation and destabilizing the fragile story Gypsy continues.
Yeah, she does have a microdeletion. There are symptoms.
You're correct, there are symptoms, and Dee Dee was trying to get her treated for the symptoms before knowing that she had a microdeletion. You should also take your own advice that you gave right here.
Take all of the facts, not just some of the things you can validate.
Yes, sir, let's take all of the facts, because together they all paint the story.
I don't care what y'all want to call it. You can call it Munchausen's by proxy or whatever, or malingering. It doesn't matter.
It does matter. And then you ended it by saying this, which I found was really weird.
For so many years, and they can't sympathize, and they just sort of waver and say she was in on the scam, and there's evidence that, she was in on the scam. Well,
She was.
That's all she was trained to do and forced to do all her life.
Now, you admitting it, sir?
It's just astounding that people, and that's why I say I can't understand why anybody can hate on her so much. I get it. They might be a little jealous and all, but
Rod, I just want to finish with this. Nobody is jealous of Gypsy. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and backtrack on that. I think I know one thing inside my body that might be jealous, and that's my chromosomes, because all of them have had to work overtime and full-time, while Gypsy's decided to retire early.
Exhibit C. Rod's next strike was to invoke the infamous forged birth certificate, a document that has long been a lightning rod in this case. Why would Dee Dee forge her birth certificate if she was a good mother? He asked, with the smug certainty of a man who believes the question alone is enough to end all debate. At first glance, it might sound like a knockout blow, a final piece of the evidence in his endless attempt to paint Dee Dee as irredeemable. But the context dismantles this claim. When examined in full, Dee Dee's decision to alter paperwork was not born out of sadistic pleasure or casual manipulation. It was a desperate move to maintain consistent healthcare access in a bureaucratic system that often punished families for requiring extensive care. This forgery was misguided, unethical, and legally indefensible, but it was also rooted in survival strategy, in the very practical need to navigate walls that denied poor families the continuity of treatment they needed to keep their children. To acknowledge this truth would require Rod to acknowledge his application, and that is precisely why he avoids it. If Dee Dee was fighting tooth and nail to keep Gypsy's medical care flowing, using every tool available, even forged documents, then where was Rod? He was not in the hospital waiting rooms, nor in the doctor's offices. He was not sitting across from lawyers or insurance representatives. He was not balancing prescriptions, appointments, and treatments. He was, instead, sailing on boats, chasing other women, and living a life detached from the grueling reality of caring for a chronically ill child. To him, the forgery is damning evidence of villainy. To others, It is evidence of the impossible choices made by a single mother, abandoned by her co-parent. By ignoring these nouns, Rod turns the narrative black and white. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. It is murky, grey, and damning to him because it forces a spotlight on his absence, his negligence, and his failure to shoulder any part of the burden. This exhibit reveals, once again, Rod's repeating pattern: exploit Didi's corpse, paint her as the eternal villain, and in doing so, shield himself of public accountability. Every time he leans on this narrative, every time he positions himself as the sober truth teller, pointing fingers at the deceased, the cracks in his own record widen. Audiences are not blind to this performance. They notice the convenient omissions, the selective memory, and the smug tone that accompanies every accusation. And the more Rod insists on this false simplicity, the more the public sees through him. His attempt to shift blame becomes transparent, a hollow performance that backfires, exposing him not as the righteous father defending his child, but as a man desperate to rewrite his role in a story that has already judged him harshly. Exhibit D. When Rod was loudly misdirecting blame, another rumor was taking shape, this time involving Ken Yuka. Allegedly, Ken was sent to rehab after failing a CPS substance test, a claim spread by his own stepsister and amplified endlessly by TikTok commentary. The rumor spread quickly because it fit too neatly into the existing narrative.
Ken Arker is missing, y'all. So I've been on TikTok scrolling videos, watching some other of my favorite creators, and I've seen a few that are asking, where is Ken Arker? Since that last live where he was obviously blowing snow and he was just going hard at people and, acting like he was trying to be a tough guy and defending Gypsy's honor, more like his own. We haven't seen him. I haven't heard from him. Where's Ken? A lot of people are speculating that he's in rehab. Some people are worried for his life because, he sleeps not in the same room, but under the same roof as the Gypinator. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because we all know Ken likes to go live and make fun of Ryan. Ken likes to go live and defend Gypsy. Ken likes to go live and be like a keyboard behind the camera warrior. We all know he's not like that in real life. We've seen him run. So where do you think Ken Arker is? Because it's completely out of character for him to not be here. But on the flip side, it's been kind of nice. Up until Gypsy went live, there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of drama. Notice nobody listens to her friends anymore. Bree? Where's Bree? Sheena? Yeah, Sheena posts for Gypsy every now and again, but 900 something followers. Nobody sees her stuff. So where exactly is Ken? My bet's going to be he's finally getting tired. He's getting tired of living the pretend life. And he's got to stay behind doors because if he's out seen in public with his boyfriend, everybody will know that him and Gypsy are just a cover. And now that there's no Lifetime TV show, what's in it for him anymore?
Gypsy, freshly out of prison and still unstable, paired with a man suspected of addiction issues, raising a child under CPS scrutiny. To audiences, it was almost too perfect a scandal, one that confirmed everything they already believed about the family. When a photograph later surfaced of Ken and Gypsy dining casually at Big Mike's in Theobodox, Louisiana, it suggested he was not institutionalized at all. Yet, by then, the rumor had already embedded itself in the discourse, shaping perceptions long before truth could catch up. CPS files had previously noted concerns about Ken's substance use, with Gypsy herself once labeling him as an addict in prison emails, words that later leaked into the public arena and gained the weight of tests. Observers remembered moments from live streams where Ken's behavior appeared erratic, his speech slurred, and his mannerisms unsettling. All of it seemed to corroborate the image of a man struggling with dependency.
Okay, I know everybody has been super excited at the thought that Ken is in rehab. And let me tell you, as of 3 days ago, he was not in rehab because he was seen in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Don't know if I said that right. Just a wild guess. But yes, him and Gypsy Rose were seen at Big Mike's. So if he was in rehab, he was out as of 3 days ago. I know everybody is saying that his sister had made a comment that he is in rehab. I have not personally seen that comment, but here is proof that he again was at Big Mike's in Thibodaux. And I really love this one because look at Gypsy. She's like, God damn it, they're taking a picture of me. I just want to say before anybody's like, oh my God, why'd you scratch out the baby? We've been dying to see the baby. That's not their baby, and I'll show you how I know. There's another picture. Again, you can see that baby right there. But if you look right here, you can see feet coming out of this car seat stroller combo right next to them. So yeah, sorry guys, but Ken's not in rehab.
Whether the rehab rumor was fact or fiction, the public seized on it instantly, adding to it the list of evidence in the case against the Blanchards. The damage was irreversible. CPS investigations fizzled without decisive action. Aurora remained in a household plagued by instability, and the internet grew even more convinced that dysfunction was not an exception but the defining trait of the Blanchard lineage. Here lies the deeper danger. In this family story, perception routinely overshadows reality, and rumors gain the same weight as verified documents. Even when contradicted by photographic evidence, speculation still shapes the cultural record, becoming a permanent stain that cannot be erased. That instability, that inability to draw a firm line between truth and spectacle, is precisely why the family remains a magnet for both public fascination and disgust. In the end, this exhibit proves that the Blanchard saga has moved far beyond questions of truth or lies. It now thrives on suspicion, scandal, and speculation, and every rumor, regardless of its verification, is woven permanently into the public archive. The fallout from these exhibits is brutal and relentless, unfolding like a slow-motion sentencing that seems to lengthen with every passing week. Gypsy Rose, once positioned as a sympathetic survivor and almost mythologized as the girl who broke free from abuse, now drowns under the suffocating weight of contradictions that refuse to loosen their grip. Her TikTok account, which once drew thousands of eager viewers within minutes, now struggles for engagement. The comment sections filled not with pity but with harsh critiques and reminders of her past. Sponsorships that once seemed eager to attach their names to her notoriety fade into silence, emails unanswered, brand deals evaporating as the risk outweighs the reward. What was once lucrative notoriety is dying into dwindling views, a visible decline that mirrors the erosion of public sympathy. Every missed algorithmic post and every ignored upload feels like a verdict declaring that the audience is no longer buying what Gypsy is selling. Rod, instead of stepping into this moment as a voice of stability or reason, has become the unmistakable liability. Rather than protecting his daughter's already fragile public image, he actively sabotages it by sprouting ignorance, misinformation, and weaponizing the very absence that defined him for decades. His statements, filled with shallow sound bites and poorly understood medical claims, not only embarrass him but also drag Gypsy further down into the pit of skepticism. To the public, his late arrival to the narrative reads less like parental loyalty and more like opportunistic meddling, a man who chose absence when his daughter needed him most but chooses presence now that cameras are rolling. His words transform him into a symbol of hypocrisy, undermining Gypsy's credibility every time he speaks. Ken, whether actually in rehab or not, remains a living embodiment of instability, a man whose name is permanently linked to substance rumors and whose presence guarantees speculation. Every appearance he makes online or in public photographs reignites CPS speculation, each image dissected for signs of sobriety or relapse. His uncertain role feeds the cycle of distrust, leaving viewers convinced that the environment surrounding Aurora is unstable at best and dangerous at worst. Instead of bringing balance, Ken's presence reinforces the perception that Gypsy surrounds herself with volatility, ensuring that any chance of building a stable family narrative is buried under suspicion. And Aurora, the innocent child who never consented to this chaos, is trapped in the eye of a storm that is fueled not by natural forces, but by adults who insist on turning dysfunction into content. Her name surfaces in CPS whispers. Her future speculated about in livestream chats, and her very existence is leveraged as part of the family's narrative. She is not a character in this drama by choice, yet she is made one, and the tragedy is that she has no power to step out of the spotlight her guardians insist on keeping lit. Public backlash has shifted dramatically from pity to disdain, from the tears shed in documentary theaters to the rolled eyes and harsh judgments on TikTok comment sections. The same viewers who once cried over Gypsy's plight now shake their heads at her live streams, calling her delusional, labeling Rod as opportunistic, and branding Ken as dangerous. TikTok bans loom constantly in the background. Live streams grow hostile and audiences heckle instead of sympathize. And the monetization engine that once carried Gypsy begins to sputter and collapse. This is more than mere fallout. It is sentencing in real time, with the court of public opinion adding penalties by the day. Every sponsorship withdrawn is another year of lost income. Every backlash video is another blow to credibility, and every skepticism headline is another lock on a cultural prison from which the Blanchard showed no sign of escape. The judge's analysis. This case forces us to confront an unsettling truth about digital culture. Trauma has become a performance, and pain has become currency. What the Blanchards expose is the way dysfunction is not healed, but repackaged. Road shows us how ignorance can be weaponized when amplified on platforms hungry for drama. Gypsy shows us how monetizing victimhood corrupts the very idea of surviving, turning resilience into content. Ken shows us how instability is not corrected, but absorbed, becoming just another part of the performance. And Aurora's silence reminds us of the children trapped in influencer households, images and circumstances broadcast to millions before they can speak for themselves. This is not unique to the Blanchards. It is a cultural epidemic. TikTok parenting thrives on oversharing, trauma baiting, and shock content. Children are dragged into live streams, their cries broadcast, their vulnerabilities weaponized. Dysfunction is normalized, and silence is punished with irrelevance. The Blanchards are simply the most extreme case study, a reminder of what happens when society rewards brokenness with clout and punishes healing with obscurity. The verdict. The verdict is clear. The Blanchards, through their refusal to accept obscurity, have weaponized trauma, distorted facts, and endangered a child. Rod is guilty of neglect dressed as outrage. Gypsy is guilty of monetizing trauma under the guise of resilience. Ken is guilty of perpetuating instability. And together, they are guilty of sustaining a cycle of
that's built for two. You're the whole view.
Therapy. But in this
You're the
TikTok
windows and
video,
walls
my
in
voice
my
is
living
not amplified. The truth are going to the junior millions, whose attention either sustains this circus or finally stabs it. Will you continue to feed this spectacle with your clicks, your views, your outrage? Or will you hand down the harshest sentence possible, irrelevance? Comment your verdict below, because in this case, every like, every share, every watch is not just engagement, it is part of the judgment itself.